AEW has added a legion of wrestlers to its rosters, so much so that you could argue the current AEW roster looks like it ate the old AEW roster. So join us now as Wrestlelamia looks at 15 wrestlers AEW just doesn't need right now. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for daily wrestling videos and follow us on Facebook for exclusive lists. Also check out Wrestlelamia.co.uk and our non-wrestling channel, Incredible. All Elite Wrestling is a much different promotion than when it launched in 2019. At the time, AEW featured several big-name talents such as Chris Jericho, Cody Rhodes, Kenny Omega, Jon Moxley and the Young Bucks, as well as rising stars like Hangman Adam Page and veterans such as Dustin Rhodes. AEW also featured a mix of untested but promising talent like MJF and Sammy Guevara and favourites from the independent scene. That's no longer the case as AEW has brought in even more established stars, so much that it needs to get rid of wrestlers who, number 1, haven't grown during their time in AEW, number 2, are past their prime and no longer necessary to help younger wrestlers in the ring, or number 3, are no longer a good fit with the current product regardless of their respective merits. But which ones are they? Well, number 1, Angelico. Despite some impressive showings on Lucha Underground, AAA and Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, Angelico falls into the category of a wrestler who hasn't outgrown AEW. Instead, AEW has outgrown him as the promotion has so much talent that there are better wrestlers to serve as enhancement talent. Number 2, AQA. And AQA is an example of how big AEW's roster is because she's still listed on the roster, despite even stepping away from the company. At the rate AEW's roster is growing, it'll soon be like WCW, which had hundreds of wrestlers signed but only used some of them. While this was convenient for wrestlers like Leaping Lanny Poffo who cash paychecks every week without wrestling, AEW shouldn't strive to repeat WCW's financial failures. Number 3, Brock Anderson. Being a second-gen wrestler is a blessing and a curse. Arn Anderson's son has a decent look and skills, but he's failed to break out as anything more than enhancement talent. Currently he's in no position to grow as there's too many established stars ahead of him. Anderson would benefit from working in a smaller promotion such as MLW or Impact Wrestling, somewhere he could continue improving while building up his reputation. Number 4, Brian Pillman Jr. Is Brian Pillman Jr. this generation's David Flair? Well, no, let's not go that far, but he's still yet to prove himself on Dynamite as anything but one of the show's many talented wrestlers who stand out. You can't blame Pillman for jumping to AEW when he was offered the chance, but he's clearly not ready for the national level, and fans aren't buying his limited pushes. Number 5, Emmy Sakura. A 45-year-old Emmy Sakura is one of several Japanese stars who added credibility to AEW's struggling women's division. There's an argument that Sakura still has something to offer AEW's struggling women's division, but the company has added so many female stars that it's time to focus on its other talent and find a role for Sakura as a trainer, assuming she's interested in the role. Number 6, Frankie Kazarian. Frankie Kazarian is a savvy ring veteran who was ideal for AEW's first 2 years when the promotion was still forging its identity, or losing its identity on how you feel about its surplus of signings. He can still go, but at the age of 45, he should be training younger wrestlers behind the scenes. Number 7, Griff Garrison. But Griff Garrison is so bland he makes Brian Pillman Jr. look like Brian Pillman Sr. by comparison. The Varsity Blondes have suffered, not so much because they're portrayed as an up-and-coming team, but because they get so much primetime exposure on Dynamite in redundant matches. Their ideal role right now would be to win matches on Elevation and Dark with occasional appearances on Dynamite in tag team tournaments, gauntlets, or battle royals. Number 8, Jeff Hardy. And no promoter with any integrity would put Jeff Hardy into the ring given his repeated failures at sobriety, his recklessness in the ring, and the legitimate question as to whether he's capable of executing the daredevil moves he attempts every match. While fans know it's hard to find a promoter with integrity, only a complete money mark would continue booking Jeff, oblivious to the liability of what happens if something goes wrong in the ring. Jeff needs to retire, and if he refuses, AEW needs to release him. Number 9, Leva Bates. Eliva Bates is the type of eclectic character who seemed perfect during AEW's earlier days when she could incorporate her skills with social media into advancing a character. But the problem is that AEW never seemed to do much with her, focusing too much on her as a wrestler rather than as a talent. Many of the wrestlers on our list are a victim of neglect, while some might claim wrestlers have to do whatever it takes to get a booker's attention. That's a tall order for anyone working on a roster the size of AEW. At this point, there's no reason to keep Bates around as she seems too much like an indie wrestler to stand out on AEW's programming. Number 10, Luther. Luther is the type of wrestler where you ask yourself what he brings to the table that guys like Nick Camarado, Brian Cage, and Lance Archer can't do twice as well. Luther isn't a hack, but when it comes to guys like Camarado, Cage, and Archer are one step away from catering, it's ridiculous to justify keeping him around. It was good that AEW brought Luther into the company to give him the mainstream exposure he never had, but keeping the 53-year-old hardcore cult favorite around in the ring is ridiculous. Thankfully, AEW seems to recognize he's better utilized as a producer. Number 11, Michael Nakazawa. Like so many other wrestlers on our list, Michael Nakazawa is a former indie darling that seemed like a good fit during AEW's formative years. The company has moved on, and it's time for this 46-year-old to take his AEW rub and milk it for a few bucks on the indie circuit. Number 12 and 13, Santana and Ortiz. What went wrong with Ortiz and Santana? The former LAX members made a spectacular debut at AEW's 2019 Double or Nothing event and were immediately inserted into Chris Jericho's main event faction, the Inner Circle. This talented tag team got over with the fans but never seemed to make it into the main event as a team. It wasn't through a lack of trying, but for whatever reason, it seems pointless for them to stay in AEW or for AEW to keep them, especially if the rumors of Ortiz and Santana being at odds with each other are true. Number 14, Peter Avalon. Like Leather Bates, Peter Avalon missed his chance to get over during AEW's early months, and it's surprising that he's even left in the company. Like Leather Bates, he found his groove and there's no justification for keeping him around. Avalon is a talented wrestler like most of his AEW colleagues, but the promotion hasn't done anything to make him seem like he belongs on Dynamite or even Rampage. But regardless whoever is to blame for this, Avalon doesn't fit in and kinda needs to go. And number 15, Satnam Singh. Tony Khan's decision to replicate the failure of WWE's push for Great Khali by bringing in big man Satnam Singh shows there's no booker that has a 100% success record. Singh may have seemed too good not to sign, but so far he hasn't shown any value to the company, and he's turned off AEW fans who seem to see Singh as representing what they disliked about Vince McMahon's WWE. All Elite Wrestling has a fantastic roster packed with established stars and wrestlers who just need the right push to break out. However, the 15 wrestlers that we mentioned aren't going to go any further in AEW as they are taking spots other wrestlers can use. A rumor has it that AEW is working on a new wrestling show which could open more spots for performers. Even so, AEW can't book its current wrestlers on a regular basis, which means they can't grow, nor can AEW gauge what stars are getting over. In a rare case where conventional wisdom is spot on rather than just group thinking, the problem is that AEW doesn't have enough television time to showcase its stars. Compounding this lack of time is Tony Khan's bizarre booking of Rampage as a third-rate show rather than an A-level companion to Dynamite. Khan's booking of Rampage reminds us of the film Major League, where a baseball team was set up to fail. Khan obviously doesn't want Rampage to tank, but you'd never guess it from the show's weekly lineup of squash matches. Khan doesn't need a roster as big as he currently has, and it's time to release these wrestlers. What do you guys think? Let us know in the comments down below. I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.